Now, the second question of whether it's still there today, I think it's even more today and even broader. The degree of intimidation during the Mao years, where you could be sent to prison or even executed for mistreating a cat by accident, that has calmed down and gone away. But I would say the breadth of the reach of the anaconda is greater. And the appurtenances that the anaconda can use to control people are much more subtle and complex now. And back in the Mao years, you could be hauled out in the street and berated by a crowd and beaten up physically or worse, or sometimes executed. And that was all sort of there in broad daylight and fairly clear and abrupt. Now, the way, especially Chinese people in China, and I'm not talking about overseas so much now, there's a spectrum of warning you again and putting pressure on you more and then more and more and more, that's very well worked out and very expensive, both in money and time. One datum that my Chinese dissident friends like to quote, this happened starting about 15 years ago, the internal budget for what's called Weiwen, stability maintenance, is greater than the national defense budget. So all this stuff about the People's Liberation Army and the submarines and the launches to Mars and stuff added up doesn't cost as much as internal security. And that's because it's very, as I said a moment ago, subtle and sophisticated. It starts with watching you, listening to your phone calls, asking friends what you're saying, and then warning you. And one of the first steps in warning you is to invite you to tea. And that's become a cliche in Chinese political control in the last decade or so. If you are invited to tea, the policemen invite you to the police station or sometimes to a restaurant and are very gentle, and they have a smile on their face and say things like, well, are you sure you want to sign Charter 08? Don't you realize that you could have a much better life if you did your own work and didn't do things like that? And don't you want your children to be able to go to the good neighborhood school? And if you don't respond properly, quote unquote, to what your tea invitation has given you, then more teeth come in. Your child can truly be barred from going to the school that's local. Or here you just mentioned the social credit system. You can be banned from buying air tickets, and it can be harder for you to buy rail tickets. It can be harder for you or your family to get medical care if you are not obeying the advice. And if it goes beyond that, then it can go to house arrest, which is like the surveillance I was talking about before. But now not only are you surveilled, you are prevented from leaving home unless you are accompanied by policemen. And often these policemen are young hirelings. They're not bad guys, and they're almost friendly. And sometimes they even sympathize with the people they're charged with watching, but they do have to watch them. And if you're under house arrest, that's where you go. If that doesn't work, the next step, of course, is being charged with a crime whose result can be that you go to prison for a shorter time or a longer time. And often you're put in what are called detention centers that are not official prisons and do not require that you go to court at all or be charged with anything. It can be an administrative decision to put you in these detention centers that are informally called black jails. That's what the ordinary people call them. If that's not enough, then you can be put in a tough prison for a long time.
Right.
And of course, at the other end of the spectrum is the death penalty. China executes more people per year than the rest of the world combined. So you have this from invitation to tea all the way to execution is a graduated process where time and again the miscreant individual is offered to change his ways.